And of course, he is always incredibly charming, Mr. Barry Segal.
Thank you. Rearrange a little bit. This story is in honor of Black History Month.
Woo! Yeah, baby!
1968 was a year of monumental events that forever changed my life. 1968 was the year that Reverend Martin Luther King was fatally shot as he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. Shortly after giving his prescient "I have been to the mountaintop" speech, in which he said, "I have seen the mountaintop, but I may not get there with you." 1968 was the year that Bobby Kennedy was assassinated by Sirhan Sirhan as he walked through the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel right here in Los Angeles, shortly after winning the Democratic primary. 1968 was the year that Richard Nixon was elected president, to become the only president to ever give up the office. 1968 was the year that Lieutenant William Calley led 105 men of Charlie Company into the tiny hamlet of My Lai, where they slaughtered 350 innocent civilians in what would become known as the My Lai Massacre. 1968 was the year that women all over this country burned their bras in protest of the Miss America pageant and its degradation of women. 1968 was the year that John Carlos and Tommy Smith stood on the platform at the Mexico Summer Olympics with black gloved fists held high to the sky in a symbol of black power and unity. And 1968 was the year that James Brown sang, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." 1968 was only 5 short years after George Wallace, in his inaugural address as governor of Alabama, promised segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. It was only 4 years after 3 civil rights workers were killed by the Ku Klux Klan in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and only 1 year after Muhammad Ali was arrested for draft dodging and stripped of his title. 1968 was my second year at Penn State University, in the town of State College, Pennsylvania, known to the locals as Happy Valley. And like many students at the time, I was angry about the war in Vietnam. I was angry about the civil rights issues in this country. And like many students, I took my anger to the street. Dressed in the garb of the 60s protester, hair halfway down my back, tie-dye t-shirt, patched jeans, an American flag sewn upside down on the back of my jeans jacket in protest. A look that seems tame by today's standards, almost comical, but in 1968 it enraged our parents' generation, and it incensed mainstream America, love it or leave it population. Well, as the fall of 1968 turned to winter, at Penn State it got gray and dreary and cold. And I got sick of the weather, I got sick of school, I got sick of protesting. I decided that I needed a break. So I decided to ditch school for a week and hitchhike to sunny southern Florida, a distance of about 1,200 miles. Now, 1968 was 1 year before the movie Easy Rider came out. And if you remember that movie, it was about 2 disenfranchised young men, played by Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda, who traveled through the South in search of truth and were shotgunned to death on the highway by some rednecks who didn't like the way they looked. Had that movie come out a year earlier, I might have reconsidered my plan. But it didn't. So the following morning, pack on my back, hair flying, on the highway with my thumb out. Well, at first, rides were easy to get, mostly hippies and other college students, but the further south I got, the more difficult it became. And by the time I reached Virginia, I knew I wasn't in Happy Valley anymore. As drivers slowed down, rolled down their windows, and hurled trash and epithets at me. As darkness descended, I found myself on the side of the road somewhere in the Carolinas, in a drizzly rain for what seemed like hours, when finally a couple picked me up. I got in the back seat, and exhausted, I fell asleep. I woke up several hours later to the sound of a loud argument, and I realized 2 things immediately. One, that while I was sleeping, they had been drinking. And second, we were completely lost far off the main highway, parked on the side of some rural road somewhere in Georgia. I excused myself and got out of the car and started walking towards a blinking red light that I recognized as a vacancy hotel sign in a motel. I figured I would spend the night and decide where I was in the morning. So I got to the motel and I walked in. The night clerk took one look at me and said, "Sorry, no vacancies." When I protested, he threatened to call the sheriff, so I was back out on the street. Now I was walking along the street. I was scared, I was tired, I was hungry. I was pondering my fate in this country that I didn't recognize as the America I had studied about. When I heard the rumbling sound of a semi coming down the road, with no other plan, no other options, I stuck out my thumb. The truck passed me and then slowed down and stopped. I ran to the truck, I climbed in, I opened the door to see a powerfully built black man with a big smile. He said, "Get in." He said, "You're lucky I came along before somebody killed you." And for the first time all day, I felt safe. And as he drove, I told him my story, and he just nodded knowingly. Well, after we got back on the main road, he asked if I was hungry, and I said, "Yeah, I was starved." He said, "I know a great truck stop." And he pulled into this truck stop. We got out of the truck, and we walked up to the door, and he turned to me and he said, "You can't come in here." And I looked on the door, and there was a cardboard hand-lettered sign that said, "Colored." He said to me, "You have to go in with the white folks at the other door." And I looked over and saw these white trucker rednecks. And I said, I'm coming with you. And he said, "Please don't do that. You'll get me in a lot of trouble." And at that moment, we both realized it didn't matter which door I walked in, all hell was going to break loose. So he said, "I'll tell you what, why don't you get back in the truck and keep your head down and I'll bring you some food." Which he did. And then he took me all the way to Miami Beach. Wow. I got out, I thanked him for the ride, I said goodbye, and I got to spend a week R&Ring on the beach, and I was fortunate to find a ride all the way back to Penn State. That was 1968, a year that completely changed my political and social consciousness. But of all the events that happened that year, the one that stands out in my mind was walking up to that diner and seeing that hand-scrawled cardboard sign. That was in my lifetime. Recently, a few weeks ago, I watched as President Barack Obama was installed into his second term in office as President of the United States. And I thought, this is in my lifetime too. And I couldn't help but flash back to that day in 1968, and I wondered if that truck driver were still alive. And if he was he watching that inauguration? And what thoughts were going through his mind? Thank you.